or you want a copy in color of the PowerPoint slides, shoot me off an email and I will shoot you back the PowerPoint or answer your question. So write it so that you can read it nice and big. And then I need somebody who has good handwriting, who can be our secretary for the questions that are going to come up that off the top of my head today I'm not going to remember. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, and your name is Brandy. I'll be like, Brandy, write that down. Okay. Did you send me, Brandy?
I did, yes.
Okay. Did everybody get the email down? Okay. Not click ahead. So during your docent training, there's a lot of different subjects that you're covering. So this is just kind of all the stuff that we're studying, some things not in depth, like you're not going to go into algae and whatnot. So we've broken it down into the classes that you've taken. You'll take something on plant. Have you had your plants class yet?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so you covered plants. And you've had herbs, because I know Chuck swapped with me. What about birds?
That's Thursday.
Thursday. Mammals?
That's
Okay, so do you see how small the little pieces of the pie are? Like this is birds and mammals and herbs. 3 classes, and you're only covering this much. We have 1 class today, and we're covering this. So it's going to be like drinking out of a fire hose. So we're going to cover a lot of material. So I want to give you that kind of like mile high. Here's kind of everything you need to know about an inch deep. But it'll give you the information so you can go look things up more in depth. You'll have the broad knowledge, and then we'll get into some specifics as well. But there's a lot of these critters out there. So it's a very broad topic for us to cover. What we're going to learn is the importance of the insects and the spiders and the other arthropods, their basic anatomy, because there's always exceptions to the rule. How to identify them at a very broad level. We're not going to get into genus and species here, because you'll see in a bit that can be very, very complicated. Some you'll just know by genus and species because it's the only type around where it's just so identifiable that you could get to that level. And then some facts and trivia about the different critters that we're looking at. What's the big deal? Why do we care about insects or arachnids or other arthropods? Any ideas why we care about these things?
Decomposition part of the cycle.
Yes, they're very important in decomposition, otherwise we'd be up to here with a bunch of dead stuff. So yes, very important. In fact, zoos who have exotic animals often have to import different insects and things from wherever that animal originated from in order to deal with all the waste, because some of the insects and the fungi and bacteria that's here aren't equipped to handle some of the exotic maneuvers. So yeah, very big deal. What else? Why do you care?
Part of the food web.
Pardon?
Part of the food web.
Part of the food web. Yes, you eat insects all the time even if you don't know. But yes, very important part of the food web. What else? Why do you care?
Pollination.
Pollination. Yes, pollination is huge. How many people remember the whole Biosphere 2 experiment out in Arizona? The big terrarium where they put people in and didn't work out so well. One of the things that happened there that they didn't think about was that the bees navigate a lot using the sun, but the glass altered the UV that was coming in. UV light wasn't what the bees were used to, so the bees were just banging up against the windows and the bees just all died off. But they were counting on the bees to pollinate the plants. Well, it just so happens that when they were building it, somehow they imported some crazy ants And they called them crazy ants because instead of going down that little ant trail one by one, they would just be all over the place. And in being all over the place, all over the plants and buildings and stuff like that, they happened to pollinate the plants because they were just kind of dragging pollen from here to there. So they lucked out with that one, but it was a very interesting experiment.
What's that place called?
Biosphere?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Biosphere. It's owned by a university now, I
And
think.
there's Arizona.
Is U of A got it now? Yeah.
Transferred several times.
Yes, it's transferred a whole bunch of times. They've done some amazing studies there to the original experiment.
Tour it. They
Yes.
have tours there.
Yeah, they have tours. I wanted to go swimming in their little fake ocean, but apparently you don't get to do that one. All right, why else do we care? What's the big deal about these things? What about some of the, what we would consider negative impact?
Disease.
Disease, they can be vectors for different diseases. Okay, what else? Anybody own a wooden home? We like the termites getting rid of all the dead trees in the forest, but we don't like them so much getting rid of our dead house. So yeah, they can be very destructive, both to our living dwellings, our clothing, our food supplies. So there are what we would consider, you know, the negative aspects. They're just doing their job. Dead wood, I'm supposed to eat it. You know, it's not their fault. Any other things that we can think of?
They can be very annoying.
They can be very annoying. And then they can be really, really cute. Like weevils, they're so cute. And spiders. Jumping spiders are my favorite. Yeah. Okay, so a whole bunch of different things, very important things. All right, whoops, I think I went 1, 2. Oh, we're okay. The organization of life, depending upon when you were born and when you went to school, this changed. They keep going back and forth. There's lumpers and splitters in science. Some biologists want to lump everything together. Others want to split it into a million different things. But this is the basic structure that we look at. We're looking at living things as opposed to the non-living things like the rocks. Viruses are like right on the razor's edge there. They do a lot of things that make you think they might be alive, and then they don't quite make the criteria for being alive. So they would not be in this list that we're looking at. And then there are domains and kingdoms, and depending upon when you went to school, there were 5, 6, 12 kingdoms. It just all depends. Phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. If you were doing the plants, you were probably doing plant families and the genus and species of some of the plants. With our arthropods, we're pretty much going to be only looking at the phylum, class, and order level. Trying to get a whole bunch further down is going to be really, really tough. So if we can get into somewhere in here, especially if you're out leading a docent-led hike or something, and you can maybe get to family, but if you can get to order, you're doing really, really well. And once you get to order, you can start looking things up on the internet or in a book. So that will help you. So here is our Western black widow, which is being displaced. Does anybody know what it's being displaced by?
Brown widow.
The brown widow, yeah. So does anybody still have black widows in their yard? You still have a few in your yard?
both.
You have both.
Like, more often I have black widows, but occasionally I'll find browns.
Okay, you will probably see that change over time because the brown widows, they're less venomous, but they're more aggressive and somehow outcompete the black widows. And the only thing that I find annoying about them is I know where to find the black widows. They're up against the rubble in the yard, and you know they're in that little corner, things like that. Brown widows are in the middle of my tomato plant, so it just takes a little bit more getting used to.
Especially down to the rocks.
Yes, yeah, you just kind of have to watch where you're going, but they're not quite as venomous, which is nice. So here's another, and can anybody just recognize any of those beetles? Have you seen any of those beetles? So we hopefully recognize them as beetles, and if not, by the end of today, you should recognize them as beetles. So they're insects, they're beetles, and these happen to be darkling beetles, all of them. So we can get down to the family in this case because they're pretty easy to identify after a while, and you may be able to get down to genus and species if you spend a lot of time in the field and looking at these guys. But to get down into genus and species, you're usually looking under a dissecting microscope and counting like their toes. Seriously, how many little sections on the antenna, things like that. So we're not going to get quite that far down. So in terms of our different kingdoms, for today we're going to be only working with the animal kingdom. You've also done some stuff with the plant kingdom. We don't cover the other ones in the docent training. And for the animals, you have the chordates. Any idea what the chordates are? I heard it in the back there.
Spinal cord.
Spinal cord, yes, those things that have a spinal cord. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, which would include us. So all those guys. And then there are those things that aren't our chordates. We have our arthropods, and that's what we're covering today. And we're going to split our arthropods into 4 groups: crustaceans, myriapods, arachnids, and insects. And they don't nicely split into just classes. So I have 2 subphylums there and 2 classes. And then I'll bring this into a little bit bigger picture. So we're not covering things like earthworms or snails. And we just ignore those here. You're hiking, you see a snail, you just move along, kids.
Nothing to see here.
That one you're going to have to cover on your own. All right, so let's look at these 4. In your handout that I've given you, I've left some blanks for you to fill some things in, so you're going to probably be flipping pages. There's 2 slides per page, and I don't have all of the slides on your handouts. So I think on the back side of the first page, there will be a spot where we'll start filling in some of this information. So what does arthropod mean? It's really good to know your Latin and your Greek when you're studying human naturalists. Oh, yeah. And if you speak Spanish, that's a bonus because you'll get some of those. And anybody wake up this morning going, oh, little achy? What was aching? Joints. If you have achy joints, you have, what's the medical term? Arthritis. Arth. Joints. Okay, so the arth part there is jointed. And I heard it out there, what's the pod part? It's the feet. So they have jointed feet. So the arthropods have jointed feet. Can you think of any crustaceans? Maybe any crustaceans you like to eat?
Lobster.
Lobster, what else?
Barnacles and crabs.
Crabs. Well, we actually have a terrestrial crustacean. The one you get to know that you probably run into in your garden all the time. And you've probably never heard them called woodlice before.
No.
That's what they are. They're woodlice. You might know them as the pill bug, the roly-poly, the sow bug, the potato bug. They're 2 different kinds, depending upon whether they can roll up or not roll up. So, if we know that this is foot, what do we think a myriapod is? It has a myriad of feet. Lots of feet. Oh, I heard some. Centipedes, millipedes, You bet. Centipedes and millipedes. What does centi mean? And milla? That's an exaggeration. It's just lots of feet. And centipede and millipede is good. How many people think we should have gone metric and are so upset that we didn't go metric in the 80s? We wouldn't have had like Hubble telescope problems. Everything would have been based on pen. So easy. All right. Arachnids. What do you think? Spiders. And people usually stop right there, right? Spiders. Scorpions, spiders, harvestmen, sun spiders, ticks, and mites. Who's ever seen a sun spider? Yeah, you see one you won't forget. Ticks and mites, your favorite, right? So we're going to cover those. So are you beginning to see that we're going to cover a lot today? Because we haven't even gotten to the insects. So that second handout you have, the one that just has like a big long list and little boxes and little pictures, those are the insects we're going to cover. So just a few. 5, 10, 15, 20, 600, something like that. All right. Ron, the stack of handouts is there if anybody.
Did they already get the handout?
They got the handouts at the table.
Oh, anybody else get a handout?
Okay, yeah. Oh, you guys can get one later.
Everybody else has.
Yeah. So we can be able to pass out. Okay. Some of the basic stuff. And this is where you're going to start looking at your little clay critters and going, oops. They have 3 or more pairs of jointed legs. Some mites have less, many insect larvae have none. So that's why I said generic insect or spider. So your little guys should have at least 3 sets of legs. We'll get into the specifics of how many they should have. The body is segmented, meaning there's kind of like a place that you can tell where like the head's attached or the abdomen's attached. And it's bilaterally symmetrical. So you could cut them in half and their halves would be the same just like us. Even though you're not perfectly, you should be a perfect mirror image of yourself on both sides. But because your cells were kind of in different environments, you got different nutrients at different times, you don't look the same. The fun exercise to do is to take a picture as straight on as you can and flip your face so that you see what you look like all left face, and then do another one with a picture to see what you look like all right face. You would be surprised. Apparently, the more symmetrical you look, the more attractive you're considered, because that means health-wise, your body really grew pretty much the same on both sides. Possessing an exoskeleton. Where's our skeleton? On the inside. Their skeleton is on the outside. It's usually tough. It's usually composed in part of a material called chitin. That's usually that crunch sheet here when you step. It's also what makes them like really crunchy chewy. If you're into eating them. So we're going to go ahead and look at these different categories a little bit in depth. So let's work with our wood lice. So I think you might have, do you have a picture? I grab this one so I can tell you when I'm going to which pages. Nope, I don't have one specific for wood lice. But, yeah, and that's only insect words on the other handout. So hopefully you also have some blank paper for notes. So it's a crustacean. They call it isopod. It has the same little feet on different sides. It's not as obviously segmented as some of the things that we're going to be looking at, but it has a head and a thorax and an abdomen. They have kind of trachea-like lungs, and they tend to lose a lot of moisture easily. So they tend to be in areas that are moist, under decaying logs, different things, because they like to typically eat dead material. Unless you have a nice vegetable garden and then they're going after your carrots or whatever else happens to be close by. So they're usually nocturnal, feed mostly on dead plant material, detrivores. Find them in damp, dark places, under rocks, in your veggie gardens. And that's pretty much the one that you're going to find. Let me see if I have another picture. Oh, this guy. Ever seen this guy in your garden? Not to scale. If you ever see this spider, it's very, very obvious because it's kind of this reddish orange with sort of a cream colored abdomen. His favorite food or her favorite food is wood lice. So it is the wood louse, singular, spider. So the wood louse spider. So good spider to have in your vegetable garden or in your garden because going after those little guys kind of keep it in check. Pretty easy to identify. I don't think you'll have any mistakes there. It's just to remember that it's a crustacean. It's kind of like your land crab or your land lobster. Probably doesn't taste quite as good. Centipedes and millipedes. Pretty easy to identify as well. Millipedes. Pretty easy to identify, and they typically have 2 pairs of legs per segment. The first few don't, but for the rest of the body, you'll typically see those 2 pair of legs per segment. Very small, little legs. Sometimes you'll see them curled up. They come in different sizes and shapes. Some of them give off sort of a irritating or toxic substance. So anytime if you were to handle these, make sure you wash your hand and your fingers in your mouth. So not something that should be typically handled. Feed mostly, again, on dead plant matter. You're going to find them usually in sort of a damp location as well. Then we have the centipedes. A little bit different. Anybody ever seen a house centipede? So they're about yay big, crawling around in your house. Once you see them, you never forget, because it's one of those things that you're like, what the heck is that? And you've never seen anything like that. So you'll see the centipedes, kind of rocky areas, trying to find a little cover. They have 1 pair of legs per segment, and the millipedes have how many? 2. So that's a distinguishing characteristic. And notice that they tend to be a little bit further spread apart, the legs, instead of just looking all like a bunch of little bitty things. They tend to be nocturnal, and they're also predominantly carnivorous. Now, when we think of carnivorous, we think of eating meat. And when we think of meat, we think, what kind of animals? Mammals, okay? Here, we're using carnivorous, that it's other living animals, not necessarily the mammals that we're used to. They can be insectivorous, where they're eating other insects, or perhaps they're eating lizards or mice or something like that. So that we're using carnivorous to be a full range of things. And because they are predominantly carnivorous and tend to be a little predatory, let's see if I have, no, I don't have that image. They have a pair of venom claws. So it is actually a pair of claws, it's not their mouth parts, that they use to inject the venom in their prey, or you if you decide you want to pick it up. And it can be a pretty nasty venom depending upon the species, so you want to not handle, or if you're a professional, handle with care, kind of thing. Observe from a distance. So I just mentioned venom. How come it's not a poison? Or is it a poison? Are they poisonous? Are they venomous? Is it a toxin? Is it not a toxin? It's very confusing for terminology.
Isn't venom poison that has to be injected into something?
So it's very specific language. So just to give an idea how specific language is, I think I have a little critter in here somewhere. Yeah, somebody give me a description for a mouse. Like, what do mice size usually look like? What does a mouse look like?
Pointy nose.
Pointy nose. Okay, so mice tend to have a little bit pointy nose. What else? Furry. Mice are furry.
Long tail.
Long tail.
Little.
Little.
Round body.
Round body.
Big ears.
Big ears.
4 legs.
4 legs. Oh, you could kind of, what color?
Gray.
Gray.
White.
White. Okay, you give that description to my IT friends, and they're going to think you're an idiot. Okay? And I bring this up on purpose because the terms we use in science are very specific. And they are not the terms people use in everyday life. And it causes a world of problems. Because people in like everyday life think, I want the facts. I don't want a theory. I want the facts. Because they think facts trump theories. Like it's and laws, oh my gosh, you know, the laws are there. So they sort of rank in science, scientific law, scientific fact, scientific theory, where in science, scientific theory is the gold. Oh my gosh. That means it has never been proven wrong. Scientific theory is as good as it ever will get. And facts are down here because they can be wrong. A scientific fact is just a piece of data that you collect, like how much somebody weighs. Well, the scale could have been off. Yes, Jeff.
Oh, gotcha. I thought when you come up with a theory, then you try to prove it or disprove it.
Yeah, it's actually you come up with a hypothesis.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all this specific language. And a hypothesis isn't just some educated guess. A hypothesis is a special kind of, we'll still call it a guess, special kind of guess that has to be falsifiable. There has to be a way to prove it wrong. Because in science, we only ever prove something wrong. We can never prove something right, because maybe there's one way we haven't tested it yet. So that's why they use the word theory. Theory means it's gone through all these tests, different models, all that sort of stuff, and we've never proven it wrong. So it's the gold standard. So very confusing with what's being used kind of in lay terms. And then other people say, no, scientific theories become law. A scientific law is just sort of a if this, then that. They tend to be mathematical. If you take your balloon and you stick it in the freezer, it will shrink. And there's a formula for that. PV equals nRT. And so scientific laws tend to be mathematical formulas. They don't have a whole lot of explanation about why in the law. The theory explains a lot of why things happen. Like the theory, germ theory. Germ theory is the theory that germs can cause illness and disease, a few other little technical things. But it's still just a theory. Just a theory. No, it's been proven over and over and over and over again, never been proven wrong. So that's the gold standard. So you can see where we get into trouble with terminology. So we are going to bring up some more terminology here. Poisons, toxins, and venom. And what they mean. And very specifically, we're going to be talking about what do they mean in terms of plants and animals. So a poison is any substance that causes a disturbance in an organism, usually on the molecular scale. So not like a big gashing wound type of thing. It's usually on a molecular scale. It's some sort of thing that interferes maybe with your blood clotting or your nervous system or your breathing, some different thing. Yes?
I just want to reiterate, all this is going to be available by emailing you?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, if you want.
You stop taking notes.
Yeah, if you want to copy this, it's all available by email. Unless it
Yeah.
comes out of here and it's not written on there, then, yeah, you'll want to write those little things down. So a poison can be something like arsenic, which is not from a living creature, because it does cause a disturbance in an organism. So that would be a poison. But now we're getting to the particulars that are distinct for plants and animals. Toxin is a type of poison. And it is produced by biological organisms. So for us to call it a toxin, we want it to be coming from a plant or an animal or a microbe of some sort. Now they'll say like toxic waste. That's like, it's kind of like the whole mouse conversation again. It depends on where it originated from for us to call it a toxin. And then we have a very specific type of toxin because of its delivery method, venom. Venom must be injected by either a bite or a sting. And now there's big debate about this. We are saying it is exclusive to animals. It's kind of like that whole virus, non-living, living thing. Well, what about stinging nettles? Because they, kind of jab you. And we're being mean to the plants. There are no venomous plants, regardless of what movies you watch. We'll be real sticklers about that and saying that venom is a toxin exclusive to animals. And it's the delivery method which allows us to use the label of it being venom. So then it would kind of look like we would talk about plants and animals as either being toxic or venomous. Right? Because toxin would be from a bite. No, of course not. Poisonous versus venomous. Because we like to be complicated. Call a plant, oops. Yep, there it is. I just put this one in yesterday and I made a typo. So, ignore plant. Okay, call an animal venomous. I'll correct it when I get home. That would be something for you to write, and I forgot your name already. I'm sorry.
Brandy.
Brandy. You are my secretary. Write down nuke plant from the venomous. When it can inject its toxin by a bite or sting, we call it venomous. So give me an example of a critter that is venomous. Bee. Rattlesnake. Can you think of something, scorpion? Something like, well, it's a herp. Can you think of a herp that doesn't have injectors, doesn't have little hypodermic needles, but still has a venom?
Spitting snake.
There's a spitting snake. Yeah, now see, that's going to be all complicated, right? Because the guy would actually have to bite you for you to call it venom. But the spit could be poisonous. So, and there are snakes that are poisonous, like you can't eat them. So it's complicated. Like Gila monsters don't actually have like hypodermic injecting venom, but they'll bite you and they'll just lock on and the venom will drip down into the wound. So they still get to be considered venomous. So if it's a bite or a sting that delivers it, it's a venomous animal. Here we get it correct. A plant or animal is poisonous when it has a toxin that is not injected. So you can get it either have an effect by it touching you, or ingesting it, or inhaling it. So it's a delivery method thing, but don't get confused to think that poisonous is defined by its delivery method. The only one is really this, venomous. If it's a bite or an injection, venomous. And then if it has other bad things, you just lump it into poisonous. So we kind of leave toxin out in the same here. So venomous or poisonous. So some people will be really upset if you call it a poisonous snake and it's not actually poisonous, it's venomous. But then you can say, well, you know what, there are some poisonous snakes that you wouldn't want to eat, so you kind of cover yourself there. But that's the big difference there. So poison covers the big lot of things, including things that are not biological. So just to confuse you with more terminology. All right. Since we brought up venomous critters, let's talk about the arachnids, the scorpions, spiders, harvestmen, sun spiders, ticks, and mites. Not all are venomous, not all are poisonous. And here's our cute little critters. So I believe you have two pictures. There's one that is just a spider that we'll label here in a moment, and then another full sheet that you have of this PowerPoint, which has no labels on it, so you can label as we go. So we have scorpions, spiders, harvestmen, sun spiders. If you see this, you will never forget it, because it just looks odd enough that you're not quite sure what it is. Ticks and mites. And this is where you take your little generic clay spider and you look at them and see how you did, and you can label the picture in the PowerPoint. Spiders have 8 legs. How many people used 8 pipe cleaners for their spider? For the legs. FYI, the number of eyes is not a characteristic that's something you can identify spiders with. They can have a variety of different eyeballs. Because some people, for some reason, seem to think that spiders have 8 legs and 8 eyes. The number of eyes can vary. So however many eyes you want to put on your spider is fine. In addition to those 2 legs, it has 2 other appendages. Now, in order to know where to stick these appendages, you kind of have to know a little bit about the structure of the body. So you should basically have 2 lumps of clay for your spider. Because let's see if I can put it back on here. The head and the thorax are combined into one unit. They're fused, the cephalothorax. So that would be kind of like if you had no neck. So your head and your thorax into one structure. So your spider should have kind of a big block of clay at the top, and then another blob of clay at the bottom for the abdomen. Now, your legs should come off of the cephalothorax. They should be coming off the thorax. So take a look at your spider, see where did you stick all the legs. They should be in that first section, not on its abdomen. Then it has, so people are moving pipe cleaners. And this is when you go to the store, and I don't know, for some reason I seem to have, I do have it, no I don't have it. Alright, I'm going to pass this little guy out, and Get a couple. This is when you are going to start going to the stores and looking at the little toys and telling whether they're anatomically correct. Seriously, because you know the injected molded plastic things, they just kind of. So you may or may not have a spider in your set. But you can tell me if it is anatomically correct, if you do. This is a good set. It tends to be pretty accurate.
Like to hide these around the house, it's Halloween.
Yes, yes. These are colors that won't fool people so much. So when you go during break to look at the arthropod box, we'll check the critters out in there and decide whether they're anatomically correct or not. It'll be a good talking point. Two other pipe cleaners are used for the chelicerae and 2 more for the pedipalps. And depending upon the type of arachnid, what the chelicerae look like and what they do will be different, but they'll be coming off of the top of the cephalothorax at the front end. And we'll take a look at those a little bit closer up in the next slide. The chelicerae are used either for feeding or defense. They can have wicked, little, sharp guys on them. The pedipalps can be used for feeding or locomotion or reproductive functions, like they can have little hooks to hold little girls in place, all sorts of stuff. So let's take a look at these all side by side, not just the spider. Oh, and their diet is mostly carnivorous. So they're eating cattle, sheep. They're usually eating other insects, but they will also eat birds. And probably get them eating a mouse, maybe something small, but more likely a bird is what you're going to see some of them going after. All right, here are our arachnids from that one screen, showing you where the division in the bodies are. So here's a scorpion, here's the cephalothorax, here's those 8 legs coming off the thorax portion of that cephalothorax. Here's the abdomen, no appendages on the abdomen, so you're looking at your little plastic critters, seeing where they have to stick a whole bunch of stuff on that little bit of the plastic. Here's the pedipalps, pinchers. So they've really been modified over time. And the chelicerae are rather small. Whip scorpion, similar, where the pedipalps have pincher-like action to them. A little bit different body structure. Pseudoscorpion the same. Then we get into the sun spider, and it's kind of opposite, where the pedipalps look almost kind of like little feelers, and the chelicerae look almost like it might be like a scorpion type of thing. That's why when you look at them, they're really weird. Like, is that a scorpion? No, it doesn't have the scorpion tail. It gets very confusing. And then spiders, where the pedipalps may or may not be longer, and the chelicerae look like fangs often in our spiders. So here's a case where for venom, it might be being injected from the front or injected from the back, like in the case of the scorpion. But it's being injected, so we get to say venomous. Let's take a closer look at our scorpions. They tend to be nocturnal. They're predatory. Most no worse than a bee sting. Not a big, huge deal. With the exception of the bark scorpion, which you're pretty much only going to find southeastern California near the Arizona border. If you grew up in Tucson where I did, they're in your house. They cling to the undersides of things, so you're always kicking wood over when you're emptying your shoes out. This is what you use your kitchen tongs for, these little chicken tongs. Pick them up, grab them. Very, very tiny little guys. So here's a quarter. That is a bark scorpion. Very blonde looking, thin, thin, thin. little pinchers on them and the tail. So these are the legs, these are the pedipalps, and the chelicerae are there. You'd actually have to kind of look at it and go which comes first. But those are the pedipalps modified. Has anybody ever taken a black light out into the desert and looked for scorpions at night? If you haven't, you totally need to do that, especially if you know some area where there's a rock wall that you sit on during the daytime and go by with a flashlight at night and you look. Because they will just be all over that little rock wall you were sitting on. The Desert Museum outside of Tucson has some of their desert nights, and that's a big thing. The kids are all there with their little UV flashlights, black light flashlights, and you're just like, I'm never sitting on that wall. This is just covered. There was a question.
Yeah, some people, if I'm correct on this, are allergic to like bee stings.
Yes.
Now, I have a grandson that's allergic to nuts, and it can be fatal if he doesn't have that. So, the same thing with,
Yeah, your reaction to something that is poisonous or specific to plants and animals has a toxin in it can be vastly different. Like peanuts, most of us can handle peanuts no problem, but some people have an extreme reaction or extreme allergy to peanuts. It's just kind of like autoimmune diseases. You're not supposed to attack your own body. Some of us do. We can have an exaggerated response. Oftentimes, the more you're exposed to something, you can tend to develop an allergy. Like people who work with textiles sometimes will develop an allergy to the textiles later. That's a real common one, and they have to quit the business.
So that little bark spider or scorpion is a lot more venomous than?
Yes, the venom is much more harmful to humans. It's not as harmful to other critters. Like my understanding is cats can tolerate scorpion venom rather well. Yeah, so the bark scorpion is pretty bad, and you want to get, in the case, I only happen to know this because I volunteered at the Desert Museum for a while, you want to get the antivenom within about 20, 30 minutes, and the hospital's about 40 minutes. So I was very careful as a high school student working with them, because that was back in the day before there was like as many lawsuits as there are now. Oh yeah, go out and hunt for brown recluse spiders. So yeah, so this one tends to be a little worse, which is where you'll often have people say the baby scorpions are worse. No, it's just a different type of scorpion that happens to be smaller. So it's not that baby scorpions are worse. But most are about a bee sting. But if you happen to be somebody who is at risk for anaphylactic shock from a bee sting, I wouldn't want to mess with the scorpion sting. I'm not sure. Okay, that's another Brandy question. Type of toxin, bee versus scorpion. I think scorpions are neurotoxins. Anybody?
That's right.
Yeah, I think they're neurotoxins. Which means I want to stay the heck away from them. Did we discuss that last year?
I think so. I don't remember. We've had
A lot has happened in the
we've had
last
discussions here on that
Yeah.
before here, but
Yeah.
not necessarily that.
And then, you just never know. If you find something new, everything's always changing. Science is self-correcting. Because people will argue and say, well, you used to think this, or this used to be true. And it's just like, well, over time we get more information, and we correct it, which is why nothing ever gets better than a theory. Because we might find out someday, we just didn't do this test. Ticks tend to live on blood. That tends to be the thing. They have some good points to them. They do. They help to control animal populations, because otherwise, we'd just be inundated with too many deer or puppy dogs, like that. So they do kind of help to weaken so that more intelligent animals who go for the weaker, sicker you know, deer and things versus our hunters who go for the healthiest looking deer. It kind of helps keep those populations in check and has the ones that are more reproductively fit survive. Fortunately for us, it usually takes 10 minutes to 2 hours for them to get ready to feed. They're picky eaters. They want to find a good table in the restaurant. They want nice soft skin. Now this isn't a good spot. We're going to move down a little bit lower. So oftentimes, if you're really good about looking at your pants and your clothing when you're out hiking, you can usually spot them before they've attached themselves to you. So that is a good thing. And I don't have my tick key with me. I don't know if there's a picture on the next, no, there's not a picture on the next slide.
We got one in the gift shop.
You have one in the gift shop, go buy a tick key. It's really nice because you put the opening is kind of a teardrop shape, and you put it over the head of the tick and you can pull, and the very fine part of the teardrop helps to pull that proboscis out of the flesh. Because if you try tweezers and things like that, oftentimes you end up pulling the body apart or squeezing it and just kind of injects more of the fluids from the tick into the animal, and you kind of don't want that. If you want to learn more about ticks and the different types and what they carry and things like that, there's a good CDC website. Because it's not so much the tick, but the diseases that the tick can carry. The viruses or the pathogens that the tick can carry that end up then getting in your bloodstream and causing the problem. So if it weren't for the stuff that they carry, you'd be like, oh, okay, you can have a little blood, you have kids to feed. I'll give you a little bit. Okay, and the ticks tend to be just like passively waiting.
How big are they?
How big are they? They can be really, really teeny tiny. Okay, another Brandy question. What's the largest tick out there? Deer tick are pretty good size. Anybody know of any other ticks that are bigger? You get the ticks on your dogs when they're engorged.
I think we have deer ticks here, don't we? This is our common tick here.
Yeah.
And they're out there.
Yes, they are. And they're just hanging onto a plant till something walks by and then they're like, so they're not running after you. You don't have to worry about outrunning the tick. They might drop on you. So it's good to have, nice clothing that doesn't have, don't expose those tender spots. Don't go bare midriff when you're hiking, things like that. So.
Yeah, I stopped doing that all the time.
A lot of people say you shouldn't wear shorts.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, for those of us who have light-colored skin, because we have a mutation that doesn't allow us to produce the melanin we're supposed to be producing. Long sleeves and pants are really good because, the melanin in our skin actually acts like an umbrella and protects your DNA from all that ultraviolet radiation. So having really dark skin is a really, really, really good thing to protect your DNA. Unless you migrated from Africa and went to frickin' cold Europe and started wearing a whole bunch of clothes and then not staying out in the sun, then all of a sudden you're not getting the vitamin D from the sun. Vitamin D is important for what part of your body? Bones. Yeah, vitamin D fortified milk because we weren't getting enough sunshine. And if you don't have vitamin D, you can get rickets, which deforms your bones, which can cause problems with childbirth. Therefore, evolutionarily speaking, we have to do something so we don't get rickets. If you have lighter skin, you can absorb more vitamin D more quickly if you're in those northern latitudes. So hence, big reason, not the only reason, for the evolution of skin pigmentation. Kind of going back and forth depending upon what was more crucial. All right. Spiders. I had pet tarantulas once. I had a little male, female desert tarantula in a terrarium, and then I had another female kind of mountain tarantula in a terrarium. She had the really big terrarium all to herself, so I thought, that wasn't fair. So when I moved, I said, well, I'm going to swap them. I'll put the couple in the big terrarium, and she can have the small terrarium. So I put the couple in the big terrarium, and the female is a male, female tarantulas. You've been with somebody else. Woke up the next morning, there were little furry legs everywhere. So then I just had 2 female tarantulas. Yeah, little territorial there. All right, so spiders come in all shapes and sizes, but what do they have in common? 8 legs. They're going to have some chelicerae and pedicalps, but kind of depending upon what they are, they'll look a little bit different. Some spin beautiful webs. Some have like crappy disorganized webs. They're just like, whatever. But really strong. You walk into a widow web and you know it because you're like trying to peel it off for the next couple of weeks. Some spiders aren't web builders. They're out there. They're going after the prey. Egg cases. You might start seeing a lot more of what kind of looks like black widow egg cases, but it's all spiky. That is the brown widow. So if you see those in your garden, you'll start to know that you're getting some brown widows there.
Chris, before you move, or
Yep.
I don't know if you're going, that top one is a cellar spider. It seems like a common spider around my house anyway. They look like that. They're in the garage, they're in the house. I tell my wife, I don't have to clean those, they're getting insects. But anyway, I thought they were European house spiders or something. Maybe this is a question for Brandy. What are the common spiders that we find in our house?
It's probably the cellar spider.
Cellar spider?
Yeah, and I'll look a little bit more up on that. Yeah, they're the ones that I just leave them alone in my house.
Yeah.
Like there's one by the desk and it just sits there. And he's eating because there's like little debris below.
Well, in the garage, there's insects in the window in my garage. You can see husks of insects caught in the in the webs.
Yeah. I selectively I do a little not so natural selection at my house where the black widow, brown widow are discouraged and all the other spiders are encouraged. So, I'm kind of upsetting the balance of things there, but that kind of works. But yeah, we'll look at that one. But yes, wonderful to have spiders in the house because they're taking care of all the other stuff. Not so much the widows though. Okay, who thinks spiders are absolutely cute and adorable? Who is like, oh heck no, and you're like, oh heck no, okay. So I'm about to change your mind. Come on. It's adorable. So you have to go home and Google cute spiders because you'll get a whole bunch of jumping spiders. And now what can you tell me about this spider that it has these big, large eyes in the front?
No, it has binocular vision probably.
Yeah, probably has binocular vision. What do you think this little guy eats? And how does it get its food? Carnivorous hunter, yeah. What's that whole thing? Eyes in front, hunt, eyes on the side, I gotta hide kind of thing. But yes, the jumping spiders typically are going after things rather than just like chillaxing, playing a little Nintendo in the web, waiting for something to show up. They're actively. Unfortunately, most of the jumping spiders are about this big. So you have to get real close to see their absolute cuteness. There are some videos, you'll want to write this one down. Lucas the spider. So somebody has animated a little jumping spider with a little kid's voice. And if I had had time, I would have grabbed that down and played it. But now you have a mission, Googling cute spiders and Lucas the spider. Spiders that are often mistaken for each other, the wolf spider and the tarantula. But if you really take a good close look at them, the tarantulas are much larger than wolf spiders. Even though people are like, oh my god, the wolf spider is so huge, it's not quite as big. Tarantulas also have these irritating hairs on the back, and you can kind of tell whether or not a tarantula is suffering from a little bit of an anxiety disorder by how bald that abdomen is. Because sometimes in captivity, you'll get the tarantulas who are just bald. They're just like, everything in my way, I'm just shooting those out. Because you can imagine if a coyote or something comes up to this and is sniffing it, and it kicks those hairs off into its nose, that coyote's leaving. There was a really sad case of a little boy at a birthday party who was looking at the tarantula, and it kicked him into his eye. And quite a few trips to the hospital because these hairs are so small and so fine that they just penetrate into the eyeball. So you want to, even though tarantulas tend to be good demonstration spiders, they tend to be, just really kind of docile. You want to be careful and watch to see if they're getting irritated and starting to flick those hairs because they can be very irritating. And good, we're almost at a point here. So again, kind of going back to our 4 groups. The crustacean, what's the crustacean that we have? Yes, woodlouse singular, woodlice plural. So that's the only one we have to worry about. The myriapods are our. How can you tell the difference between the centipede and the millipede?
Millipede has 2 legs on the lower.
Yeah, so it has 2 legs per segment, but you'd have to get like pretty close to be, like I said, a lot of things done under a dissecting microscope. The 1 per segment for the centipede, and usually the spacing kind of gives you a clue there. Now, which one of these is venomous? And why is it venomous when a lot of millipedes are poisonous? Injecting. That's the big key. Venom, you can kind of think of it like a V comes to a point for injecting. So if it's venomous, it's injecting. So our centipedes are going to be venomous, even though there are some millipedes that secrete a toxin that is poisonous. Our arachnids, our scorpions, our spiders, our harvestmen, sun spiders, ticks, and mites. I didn't cover the mites. Spider mites, if you have plants. There are other dust mites. There are like feather mites. They're often really, really small. And the number of legs can vary on mites, so it gets a little confusing. If you're a gardener and you have spider mites, how many people have seen spider mites in the garden? It kind of looks webby and little red dots. If you ever see a really fast-moving red dot amongst all the others, that is a mite that is a predator of spider mites. Or if you've ever had that cushioning, we'll get into it later, but like cushioning scale on a plant, and you see one like booking around, that is a predator of it. So when you see a bunch of things together, and one is moving around a lot faster, it's often a predator of the other one. So the fast-moving mites are good, and the spider mites not so much if you want your tomatoes and things. So we've covered all those guys, which means we're going to be getting into the insects. So it is, will they be ready for us a little early?
Yeah.
Okay, just to give you an idea, it took us how long? And we haven't even started these guys yet. So we definitely want to be back on time from break. We haven't done the insect body yet, but look at the insects and spiders in the arthropod box. I'll check and see if those are correct. I'll give you a clue again. The legs are not on the abdomen. They're on the thorax. So, all right. And what time do they need to be back?
Let's see, it's 10:22. Add 15 minutes to that. What is that? 10:37.
Yeah.
So let's go.
Is everybody ready to delve into the insects? You got your energy back. You caffeinated. I probably caffeinated way too much. We're gonna get started. This is where you're gonna look at your little clay insect and see if you need to rebuild. And you have half a sheet picture that you can put the corrections, the labels on. All right, insects. 6 legs, 6 pipe cleaners. And you're going to stick all of those legs on the thorax, not the abdomen, on the thorax. Antennas. Did you use a couple pipe cleaners and stick them out on the top of the insect's head? That's your little antenna there. 3 body parts that are separated. So they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So there'll be 3. So if you have 3 little blobs of clay, that's good. Some insects, it's more obvious where the head is joined on, and others will be just like really squat onto the body. Most have wings. That's what your feathers were for. That's your insect wings. And they tend to be 2 pairs of wings for most insects.
He threw me off with the feathers. Oh my god.
You know, I didn't know what else to do for wings. So, I figured it's as close. I mean, pipe cleaners aren't really legs. So we're just kind of making fun of it. Eyes. They can have a varying amount and different types of eyes. Spiracles, which I'll show you in another slide, are little openings on the side of the body. And we're going to take a look at their diet, because their diet it's a good diagnostic. What it's eating kind of tells you more about what type of insect it might be. Or if you want to find a particular type of insect, if you know what they eat, you have a better chance. Like if you know somebody loves, like donuts, you're going to go hunt them down at a donut store kind of thing. So this is not in your picture, but I just want to give you kind of an idea of the complexity of the insect body and to show you where these little spiracles are. This is where the air passes in, and this is how they get their oxygen, because they don't have lungs the way we have lungs, and they don't breathe the way we breathe. It's a little bit more of a passive system. So all that stuff, let's see if I can get it. You can kind of see the respiratory system here in blue. So the little tubing goes throughout their body in blue. This is their circulatory system. So this is their kind of their heart. You don't have one big beating heart in there. Big reproductive system. So these guys just can really, really take over. Nervous system. And one of the interesting things about the way that they breathe has a lot to do with how big insects can get. So back in the day, that would have been the actual size of a dragonfly. Any idea why they're not so big anymore?
Oxygen.
Part of it is the amount of oxygen that's in the atmosphere has changed over time. And if you need to get the oxygen in passively through a tube system, it can only go in so far. So that's part of the reason. And then another reason has to do with when the insects evolved in comparison to other animals. When did birds show up? Much later, right? So when it was a predominantly insect-driven world, you had insects in all sorts of different niches. So you could have up to a certain size of insect, as long as the oxygen was sufficient to get in there. But now we tend to have other things that take over kind of that size niche. It's like, boy, that would be you can imagine a bird going after that. It's like the whole dinner. And then this guy's probably not going to find a whole lot to eat of the right size. So there's a lot of competition. So thank goodness. Could you imagine mosquitoes? There are just certain insects, as much as I love insects, that I do not want them that big. It's just like you don't want pigs to fly or cows to fly because you think it's bad when a bird does something on your vehicle. Not good. So we're glad that insects tend to be relatively small. Oops, let's go back. And stay. Okay, so this is what you need to know about an insect diet. This is what people who study entomology need to know about an insect diet. And all the, leaf miners, stem borers, fruit borers, neuroptera, what they're eating. Parasites are usually smaller than their host. Oodles of information, we're going to simplify it. Insect diet. There are the herbivores that eat plants. There are the carnivores, which we discussed before. It just means that they feed on other animals. It doesn't necessarily mean it's mammals. So they mostly feed on other insects. There are two general types of carnivores: predators and parasites. So a predator goes after its prey, kills it, eats it, and then has to go after another prey, kill it, eat it. Where a parasite is, some of us have relatives that are parasites. They just kind of move in and just suck the life out of it. Hopefully not too quickly, because then the parasite's got to move, and the parasite doesn't want to move. So typically the parasites just slowly will decrease the health of their host, so to speak. Some are a little bit more aggressive, though. And then those that consume all the junk that's left, the garbage eaters, the detritivores. They consume the detritus, so the decomposing plant and animal material, and that includes the animal feces as well. So there will be specialized insects for different types of plant material or different types of waste material. So in terms of decaying all that dead stuff that's out there, what are the two other things besides insects that really help to clean up the environment? It's not the CIA, it's FBI. So fungi, bacteria, and insects are big decomposers. What they eat has a lot to do with whether they have forks, knives, spoons, straws, chopsticks. So we have a couple of different types of insect mouth parts. The insects that are predominantly chewing are going to have very large mandibles for chewing. They're the ones that can give you a good pinch. If you've ever picked up a beetle that was like, oh, he's kind of grabbing a hold of you, they have good mandibles for chewing. Things like your moths and butterflies, they use a proboscis to suck, and it's like a real wimpy, tender straw, like it's flimsy, kind of like tubing. So they can get it deep into the flowers or other places. They don't always go, there are a couple that go for blood. Vampire Lepidoptera. But this tends to be a more flexible tube. Then there are the piercing, sucking mouth parts. They like jab you and then suck the fluids up. Those are my least favorite because those are like the mosquitoes or I'm trying to think of one of the ones that now it's going to come to me. But yeah, really significant piercing, sucking mouth parts, like the toe biters, whose name? Yeah, they're in the strings, and I think I have a slide that will come up because I'm trying to think of what type of imager it is.
I'm talking beach.
No, these guys have a really wicked proboscis they stick in. You'll see in a picture why. And then lapping. So like a fly will have a lapping mouth part. Bees also will have like a little tongue that can lap things up. So those are going to be your 4 different, basic different types of mouth parts that will tell you what that insect is primarily going to be eating based on the mouth part. So chewing, sucking, piercing, sucking, and lapping. So chewing with the mandible. Examples for adult insects that are chewers: grasshoppers, crickets, beetles, termites, cockroaches. They're real chewers. Some immature insects, though, are also chewers. So our butterflies and moths, which are later just delicately sucked in the nectar from flowers, are voracious chewers when they're little kids. So when they're immature, they're quite the chewers. Examples of chewing. Mandibles sometimes are secondary, so there might be, they might have like primarily lapping, but they might use mandibles, not always for eating. So like a cutter bee or some other bees might be using their mandible to cut a piece of leaf off, or they're using their mandibles if they're building a honeycomb, kind of chew up the wax and be able to form it. So mandibles are not always for chewing. Sucking, light tubing. Here's an example where we have a butterfly getting some of the nectar out of a flower. So much more flexible proboscis there. And piercing, sucking mouth parts. So this, so some of these are significant. What they, I mean, they trunk of a tree, you know, a branch of a tree, they're going to pierce pretty darn hard. Or a people, you know, they'll get through the skin of different animals depending upon whether they're blood sucking or sap sucking.
Do leeches fall into this category?
Nope, leeches are in a
Totally different.
realm, yes, a realm we're not covering.
Oh, yeah. Now, what's that called?
This one is, I think this is a wheel bug is the common name of it.
But it's not,
So it looks like a Regiviidae to me because of its head. And my books are in Tucson, but I will pop that one up. And I think I have a slide where it might have even the genus of this one on. My brain is a little, the last year's been kind of, so my brain's power is, I'm like a 10-watt light bulb today, so that's why we have Randy. So what's the insect on the piercing, sucking slide, and we'll get you the answer for that. But a wheel bug comes, that's the first thing that pops in my head. Lapping, isn't it cute? Cute. So lapping insects, not so cute. Some flies are adorable, not so much the like housefly. So they're just kind of sponging up the liquids there. So you're out there, those poor little bees that, you know, are kind of not making it through the day. Give them a little sugar water, help them on their way. Insect lifestyle. So we've gone over kind of the basic ways that insects eat. Kind of, we'll get into more specifics of what they eat when we look at the different insect orders. But you'll know what the mouth parts are that they'll need to have for that. Now, another way to identify insects is based on their life cycle. Some insects, they'll lay an egg, They have an immature stage, they have an adult, like people. We start out as eggs, and then we're born little people. And then we just grow and become bigger people. Nothing very exciting. What you see when they're born is what you get in just a stretched out version later. Insects, well, that's exoskeletons. And exoskeletons are wickedly cool. You know how often you like flick that insect off the table, and for its body size, and it goes launching, and it hits the concrete, and it just walks away? I'd like to be one of those. That would be really cool to have an exoskeleton. But there's a problem with an exoskeleton. What do you think the problem with an exoskeleton is? Growth. He has a few too many six-packs. He's not going to be big for that exoskeleton anymore. And the 5-year-old exoskeleton you were rocking as a little toddler is not going to fit you when you're 25. So you have to constantly get a new suit. And that makes you vulnerable. So when you're splitting out of that exoskeleton, you're all like soft and squishy. And so you need some time for it to harden back up so that it becomes that armor again. So it's kind of like, you know, Iron Man's changing his suit. He's going to be vulnerable kind of thing. So issues with exoskeletons. Okay. Different types of life cycles, different changes, metamorphosis. So it is a change in form. And there are 3 types that we're going to lump them into broadly. And it's important to know these because what they look like if they're immature stage might not be anything like they look like as an adult. So without metamorphosis, it's simply an egg, a young, and an adult. And the young looks just like the adult in miniature version. Incomplete metamorphosis, they start out the same as an egg. They have a juvenile stage that we call a nymph, and then they become an adult. And there's a slight change in how they look between their nymph and their adult phase. Complete metamorphosis is a complete change. Start out as an egg, then they have a stage we call the larva, and then they go into the secret cabinet to do their big huge change, so they're in their pupal stage, in the pupa, and then they emerge as an adult, completely different looking than when they were a larva. Now we have nymph, larva, pupa, naiad, cocoon, chrysalis. We're going to have all these names. And if you don't remember those names, you just say immature. The immature insect, you know, it's just an easy catch term that you can use if you can't remember is it a nymph or is it a larva. You can just say immature. So let's take a look at some examples. Silverfish. Silverfish, very primitive type of insect. They start out as an egg, and then they're like a teeny little silverfish, and then they grow to an adult. And they pretty much look identical, just a little difference in size. And this is one of the exceptions to the wings. Silverfish don't have wings. You'll often see those running around in your house. I haven't really seen silverfish in the wild. Has anybody seen silverfish in the wild? It's been urbanized, I guess. If you ever see one of them, yeah. So I want to know where they're hanging out. So if anybody can figure that out, other than in my house, let me know. Which is weird. I finally had to break down and have my house tented for termites because all the other less toxic, or I should say less poisonous alternatives just weren't working. And so we tented. And I noticed 2 things as a result, well, okay, 3 less termites. But the 2 other things that I noticed, which may or may not just be coincidental, is I have tons of silverfish now. Like crazy. And no Argentine ants. Like none. For several years now. So, interesting. So,
So you'll have termites again.
eventually,
No, I mean, because don't the ants and the termites battle?
yes, ants and termites battle, which is why when you've got that pest control guy coming, we can get rid of your ants, you're like, no, because they don't get along with termites. And I had a deal with the Argentine ants, they could live in the wall, in the yard, just not in the house. So, you know, discouraged in the house living. So, okay, so without metamorphosis, they look the same throughout their life cycle. Incomplete metamorphosis, not a complete change. A bit of a change, a noticeable change, but not a complete change. So here's an example of a dragonfly. Starts out as an egg, and we have a nymph, but because it's a nymph in the water, an aquatic nymph, we call a naiad. But you can also call it immature if you don't remember those terms. And then it goes through the rest of its life cycle and becomes an adult. So it looks similar. You know, you can see the wings and the body, and the head looks similar. Another animal that goes through, another insect that goes through the incomplete would be something like a grasshopper. So we have an egg, and then we have the nymph, and it goes through a couple molts until it becomes the adult. And they look just close enough to your adult grasshoppers. One of the big differences, and we'll have a slide on this, is their wings aren't as developed in one of the immature stages. So when you go out to catch these little guys, you don't have to worry about them flying away if they're an immature or a nymph of a grasshopper, but boy, those hind legs are definitely made for hopping. Now let's take a look at complete. Oops, okay, so nymph looks similar with underdeveloped wings, and I might, oh yes I did. Here's a picture. So here's an example of this grasshopper, and it's not yet an adult. It has very immature wings versus the length of the adult wing. So it is a definite change in appearance, just not a complete change in appearance. So incomplete. Complete metamorphosis. We start with an egg, we go to a larval stage, and then we'll have some sort of pupa that it forms, and it will emerge looking completely different. You only know that this is going to turn into a butterfly because of experience. But if you had never seen one before, you're like, what? That ain't happening. And the larval stage, depending upon what it's going to be when it's an adult, has special terms as well. So we would say like a caterpillar for a bother, butterfly.
When they turn into a butterfly, do they keep any of their old self at all?
Well, they keep the molecules and the chemicals, and they just restructure everything. You know, I don't know if they have memories. They can keep their memories or not, you know. Memories are chemicals, so it's possible. Yeah.
Someone at a butterfly garden told me that when they're in the pupa, that it isn't like the legs become the new legs. It's just it becomes a complete soup and starts.
They just kind of start all over again. Because if you look at the larva, they have these like little proto-legs in the back and stuff, and those just completely disappear. There's nothing on here that looks like wings. You know, yeah, it's just kind of quite the, you know, I don't know, that's just amazing.
How long does that whole cycle take?
It depends. It's based on the insect and a little bit also on the region and temperature, whether it's something that they'll stay dormant longer in one of these stages. Like there are beetles that will stay as grubs for years. Because they're just
See,
enjoying.
cicadas, for example, that they'll be in the ground for 10 years or
Yeah.
more, and then all of a sudden, that year comes and there's zillions of them.
Yeah, they're just like, all right, it's time to grow up, gotta get a job, have kids, they're kicking us out.
Are they bisexual in terms of a male and a female, and does that ever change during the pupa stage?
Wow, you know, no one's ever asked me that again before. That's a really good point. You know, because other animals can change sex. Like if there's not enough male sheephead fish, a female will turn into a male and like change completely, color, the whole 9 yards. I mean, you know, it's very fluid. I mean, just look for an example when a human decides to go from a female body to a male body and simply takes the male androgen hormones. Their voice deepens, their bone structure changes, the facial hair, the body hair. I mean, just radical, just little chemicals, boom, can cause radical changes. So that's a really good question. I'm going to have fun looking that one up. All right. Because I don't know how you sex a caterpillar. I have to find an entomologist to give me that one. But in their larval stage, depending upon what they're going to be, they have special names. So a caterpillar would turn into a moth or butterfly, a grub into a beetle, a maggot into a fly. So there will be some specialized terms. You don't need to know those, but it's just like if you hear those terms, you'll kind of know that they're specialized. And the same with the pupal stage. There can be just a pupa, so you'll find sometimes moths and you'll just see the pupa kind of buried in some leaf litter or the dirt. Other times they'll make a chrysalis like you see with a monarch butterfly, or a cocoon, the ones that spin the silk cocoons. So things vary a little bit in that pupal phase as to what the structure looks like, what we would call it, but they're still all pupa, so you can use that as the term and know that you've covered it. Now we're used to seeing the moths and butterflies when we think of this complete metamorphosis. We have the egg, the caterpillar munching away on things. We have some sort of pupa, whether it be a chrysalis or a cocoon, and then out comes the butterfly. So that's what people think. It looks completely different. But a lot of insects go through this. For instance, beetles. So you know, whoops, I didn't mean for it to be an X-rated picture. Okay, we're all adults, we're good? Okay, just notice that. Starts out as an egg. This sucker doesn't look anything like your little ladybird beetles. You see that going around in the garden, you're like, hey, what the heck is that? Very predatory towards aphids, so you want to encourage these little guys. Which is why gardening takes forever for me, because I'm trimming a plant. I'm like, oh, look, okay, we got to put that guy back in the garden. Oh, there's a pupa on that leaf. Got to cut that leaf and put it back in the garden. So these will be some of the immature stages that you'll see for the lady, not a bug, beetles. So there's some images there. And the larvae of different beetles will look different, like those white grubs that you'll find in your lawns or the compost bins will turn into beetles. Oftentimes they'll be the like fig beetles or June beetles. All right, another example of something that goes through complete metamorphosis are flies. So you have a little egg, you have a little larva. Once again, you wouldn't know this was a good guy in your garden. You'll see this little brown, crusty looking thing. So this is a type of fly that its larva will predate on aphids and other insects, and it moves rather quickly around on the plants. But looks, again, completely different, complete metamorphosis. And a much more attractive fly than a house fly. So, complete metamorphosis, and now showing them all in comparison. Without simply an egg, a nymph, adult, and they all look the same. Incomplete, not a complete change of appearance, but a slight, where the nymphs tend to have underdeveloped wings in comparison to the adult. And complete metamorphosis, the adult doesn't look anything like the larval stage. And it has the additional stage of the pupa in there, so 4 stages. All right.
be incomplete when they, because I ran into, walked outside and they were,
Were they swarming?
Swarming.
Yeah, yeah. So they have an incomplete metamorphosis. It'd be kind of cool if they did a complete metamorphosis. Who knows what they would look like? But yeah, they have an incomplete metamorphosis. And they're now in a new order with cockroaches and praying mantis, and it just doesn't make sense to me, but I think it's all based on genetics. So we'll get through that. All right. Once you've gone through this class and you have your handouts and you run across one of these insects, you're going to be like, I don't know. But hopefully after today, you'll at least be able to figure out what order they're in. And then you can go to like What's That Bug or bugguide.net and be able to click down a little bit further to investigate. You'll see they have crustaceans, and here's your myriapods, and different things, and you'll be able to go down and into the insect category and be able to click on the order and start narrowing down what it is when you're trying to identify something. So those are good sites. I think, was that written down, or are you going to have to write that one down? Yeah, you have to write that one down. Very good. And it is really hard to get to genus and species, so you'll have people saying, oh, that's a blah, blah, blah. It might not be. It might look a whole lot like that, but seriously, unless you've got the dissecting scope and you know what region you found it in, it's hard to get really, really specific. So we're going to just look at the order level a little bit higher up. There are approximately 24 orders of insects, depending upon whether you're a lumper or a splitter. Beetles, tons and tons of different types of beetles. That's the number of described species so far. Roughly 300 to 400,000, probably changing daily. Butterflies and moths, flies, your bees and wasps and ants. So some serious numbers, and this is just 4 orders. So you can kind of understand why you might not learn all the beetle species. It's just a little bit of time. So we kind of go to order and maybe families. So the first order that we're going to look at, and this is where the second handout that I gave you is going to be helpful where you can take some notes. So these are the orders that we're going to cover. And they've changed the name because when I was studying, it was the Thysanura, and they redo stuff, and it just really irritates me because I used to know. So here's your little silverfish. So they're saying underbark, in leaf litter, caves, nests, and deserts. I just find them in my house. I have yet to find them. They should say houses there, because I think that's the most common. Omnivorous. Yes, these little suckers will eat anything. My books. Who knows what else they're eating in the house. Without metamorphosis and no wings. So this is one of your insects without wings. It's a very primitive insect. And pretty easily identifiable. The Ephemeroptera, or the mayflies, ephemeral meaning that they're very short-lived. The end of these words that you'll see a lot, like Hymenoptera, Lepidoptera, and Ephemeroptera, means winged, like the flying pterodactyl, P-T-E-R-A. So it's a winged finger dinosaur. So that P-T-E-R-A means wing. So teeny tiny, this is somebody's like finger. Tends to be near streams and ponds because the nymphs are aquatic. And aquatic nymphs have the special name of a naiad. Yes, don't have to remember that. But it's just, And when you're going in streams and you're getting these different aquatic insects out and identifying them, oh my gosh, you're looking at all the different body parts to try to figure out what type it is. They also tell you a lot about the quality of the water, because some insects will only be in nice clean water, other insects want kind of dirty water, and so it kind of tells you about a lot about the ecosystem that they're in. The food, they're herbivores, and the adults don't feed, which also plays into their very short life as an adult, because if you're not eating, you don't live very long. So, life cycle, incomplete metamorphosis, the adults live a few hours or days. They're just there to reproduce, look cute, and kick the bucket. Very small, and you'll usually see them around what month? May, yeah. Kind of that May-ish, depending upon where you live in the country. They're very, very small. Dragon's tooth, or the dragonflies and damselflies, Odonata. Once you've seen them in comparison, you won't mistake one for the other. The dragonflies tend to be a lot beefier, and how they hold their wings is a little bit different as well. They have aquatic juveniles as well, so their nymphs are aquatic, so they're naiads. Tend to be near, they can fly quite a bit of a distance, so near is kind of a rough term. Near marshes, ponds, lakes, and streams, because those nymphs are aquatic. The nymphs are predaceous carnivores. They will go after tadpoles and fish and other insects that are in the water. The adults are also predaceous carnivores. If you look at that head, that's some serious eyeballs. Like the whole head is mostly eyeballs. And they have grasping forelegs, so they can really grab things. And they like to be up and looking around. You'll see them checking it out, looking for something to eat. Incomplete metamorphosis. They can be up to 3 1/4 inches, so they can be really good size. Most damselflies fold their wings over, whereas the dragonflies will have their wings out. So that is a good indicator, but not all of them read the book, so some exceptions to the rule. So dragonflies and damselflies. And when you identify these down to genus and species, you are actually looking at patterns of the wings. I mean, it's just, you have to have good eyesight or a dissecting microscope. Dermaptera. So something winged, dermis like your skin, so they're like a leathery skin winged thing. And yes, they can fly, some. Earwigs, where they ever got that name, I don't know. Understones or woodline on slightly damp soil or in your house, again, maybe just my house. Omnivores, some are almost exclusively carnivores, but those aren't the ones that you typically run into. The ones that you run into are more the omnivores. Incomplete metamorphosis, they're usually less than an inch. The wings of some of them are too small to fly, but some of the wings do extend further than that. And they have the 2 sets of wings. The outer set has a more leathery covering to it.
What's with the pictures in the back?
They look cool. They can give a little pinch. They're not venomous though. They're not going to inject you with anything. So
What's the purpose, do you know?
I think it's a defense, and Brandy's going to write it down. Whether it is, I don't believe they're sexually dimorphic, so I think both the boys and girls are sporting them. I'll double check on that. So just sort of A, looks cool, and B, probably a defense thing. Because it's either, well, it's all about sex. Because it's either defending your territory because you want to have kids. It's all about reproducing. So whether you have it because the women think it looks cool or whether you actually need it in battle, it's hard to say. Survive long enough to reproduce. So we'll look that one up. Orthoptera, the straight winged. So your crickets, your katydids, and your grasshoppers. Can you tell me what sex these guys are? You will from now on. This is a female cricket, because this is the ovipositor coming out of the back end. It's used to lay eggs. So if there's something hanging off the back end of your cricket, it's going to be a female cricket. And how long and obvious the ovipositor is depends on the insect that you're looking at. So you'll start to see that. So that would be a little girl cricket. They are herbivores. Some are omnivores, like your crickets tend to be a little bit more omnivores. And they have those chewing mouth parts, those mandibles for chewing. And boy, can they chew. Incomplete life cycle. How will you know whether it's a juvenile or an adult? Like for instance, this grasshopper. Kid or adult?
Wings.
The wings. So what can you tell from those wings there? It's gonna be an immature, it's gonna be a juvenile, and we're gonna call it a nymph. Yes. All right. And then we have the katydid here. So I am going to teach you my secret for catching these guys if you don't happen to have like a handy dandy net. And I just didn't bring my big net in, so this is just for illustration purposes because you wouldn't catch pretty much anything with this. Insect nets tend to be really long because you're going to swoop and swirl and the net will cover back over and trap your insect in there. But if you want to catch pretty much any insect with your bare, well not any, but larger insects with your bare hands, the two-hand method, the insect will be there and you will distract the insect with one hand while you very slowly and stealthily take your other hand in, and then you can grab it and pick it up because he or she will be too distracted. So you can get your grasshoppers, and, not so much the crickets, but some of the bigger ones.
How about flies?
Flies tend to shoot straight up, so if you want to catch them, you want a container up above them, or if your purpose is still a straight up thing, for whatever reason, they tend to launch straight up. But, you know, I tend not to dispatch things as much as I can, although I must say that I do encourage certain species above other species. All right, so that's our straight-winged guys, Orthoptera. Dictyoptera, roaches, termites, and mantids. How these ever wound up together drives me a little crazy, because these used to be an Isoptera, these used to be separate. So it's a super order, so the orders are still separate, but they put them in a super order of net wings. So your roaches and your termites are together in one order, and then your praying mantis in another order. And we'll take a look at a local guy. So this is, as opposed to like the German cockroaches or some of the big cockroaches that you see, the cockroaches that you're going to find more in California are going to be small little woodland type cockroaches, and not the ones that are going to be infesting your house or your apartment. Usually under rocks and loose bark and litter, grassy slopes, coastal sage, chaparral. I don't have the food there, but I believe they're omnivorous. But Brandy will write that down for the local cockroaches. Incomplete metamorphosis, where the nymphs look very similar to the adults. And about an inch, not very big at all. And if you've ever seen Joe's apartment, cockroaches are kind of Did anybody see Joe's apartment? All right, you're all Googling Joe's apartment. Get it on DVD. Stuff.
What do they eat?
They're pretty omnivorous, so we're gonna double check on what the local guys are gonna be eating. Termites. Well, we know what the termites eat, don't we? House and home. No, they're pretty much out there in the wild, taking down the trees for us and helping us dispatch some of the stuff that's out there. And then the mantids. So your little praying mantises. They are exclusively carnivorous. So if you happen to be hatching them out, as soon as they hatch, they need to go their separate ways, because otherwise they're looking kind of yummy to each other. So I often will see on some of these bug websites where they're somewhere in Minnesota and it hatched and it's winter and they don't want to put them in their yard, and then it becomes kind of like you either have to have a really big enclosure or a whole bunch of different little cages that you're feeding them in, or you're going to have a whole lot less at the end of the season. But they're really cute, just little miniaturized versions, because they have an incomplete life cycle. It's pretty much just the wing that changes through their development. Definitely a very predatory insect with those eyes and those grasping forearms. So we have little bitty thrips. So if you've ever looked in the head of a flower and you see little black things moving around in the flower, it's probably a thrip. Teeny, 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 tiny. I mean, this is a super blown up image of the head of a flower. So they're just almost, you can't even see how much of a finger that is. Very tiny, tiny, little feathery, fringed type wings. They're herbivores mostly, so they're going to be eating little bits and parts of the plants. Very, yes, very, 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 very tiny. Like, you are not going to be pinning those insects like you pin other insects. For something really, really tiny, we have little paper triangles. And you stick the pin through the paper triangle and you bend the very tip of the paper and you stick like a little bit of fingernail polish there and you pop it onto the insect. But thrips are really very small, kind of a little bit softer. You might have them in a vial with alcohol. So some insects don't pin well if you're making a study collection. This is another one where things got kind of thrown together. The hemiptera, the half wing. So the wing doesn't, the outermost wing, first wing doesn't look completely the same. It's also a merging of two orders. It used to be Hemiptera and Homoptera, and they just decided to lump it all together and make it really complex and a lot of stuff to study because they look kind of completely different. So the Heteroptera, which have the different wings, are the true bugs. These are the only guys that you get to call bug, technically. So I'll show you how you can identify these. And then we have some of the cicadas and tree hoppers that often have that kind of wedge-shaped body. Makes them a little bit easier to identify. And then your aphids and your scales, the cochineal or cochineal that you'll find on the prickly pear is a scale insect. And for these things to be all lumped in the same order is a little crazy for me, because this doesn't look anything like an aphid, although they will eat aphids. So we're going to go into each one of these individually and give you a little bit better feel. The Hemiptera, one of the easy ways to identify the Heteroptera, the true bugs, are that first wing, the covering wing, has an area that doesn't look like a shield. You can actually, it's kind of transparent. You can see the veins of the wing in it. So the bottom of the forewing is membranous. So you'll see that the wing looks like it has two parts to it. Because of this, when it has its wings folded up, there's sort of an X shape on the back. So that kind of helps you identify them as well. And my favorite part, they have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So those will be in the little sternal groove on the underside. And they might be little or they might just be huge. So those are the three things that will kind of help you identify the true bugs, the things that you actually get to call a bug. Everything else is
Would they pierce and, if you put them in as a defense?
Sure.
Yeah, rather than just looking for food.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. No, some of these will actually use it to pierce you because they want to drink.
Yeah.
Some of them are blood drinking, others are sap drinking. But yes, they can inflict a pretty vicious stab with that proboscis. It can be quite razor sharp. So let's take a look at some of them. Water striders. You can't really see it here, but if you looked at the top of the water strider, you'd see sort of that X pattern. You'd see the membranous part of the wing there. The shadow of water striders is usually what you see first, and then you'll have to look a little bit further off to see them. What you'll commonly call a stink bug or a shield bug comes in different colors and patterns, has sort of a shield shape. Pentatomidae has that kind of a shield to it. Penta is how many? 5. How many sides does it have? 5. So they came up with that name. We've had some harlequin bugs that have been replaced by smaller ones that I want to say are from Asia. So there's been kind of a changeover in some of the little colorful stink bugs, and what their eggs look like is one of the identifying things there. Milkweed bug, which you'll often see on milkweed, the same thing where you can kind of see that X-shaped pattern, the membranous part of the wing. They're on the milkweed, poking their proboscis into the plant and getting the plant juices out. Here's a cone-nosed bug, call it a bug. Same thing, that X-shaped pattern, the membranous part of the wing, and one wicked hypodermic needle that it's going to stick into some warm-blooded animal and suck the blood out of. And unfortunately, some of them are vectors for Chagas disease. So in certain parts of the world, more I think like South America, you have to be really careful. Some people, even if they're not a vector for the disease, if they're not infected with it, will have an allergic reaction to the saliva kind of fluids that it injects. So herbivores, carnivores, and bloodsuckers. Incomplete, these are the true bugs. They have those piercing, sucking mouth parts. Think of it kind of like the soda straw that goes into a juice box. Those little sharp points. Okay. Spittle bugs. You ever been walking around and see what looks like a bunch of spit on a plant? Feels like spit if you ever pick it up. This is what the immature insect looks like inside. This is under a dissecting microscope, and this is what its adult form looks like here. And then you'll have other leaf hoppers and tree hoppers and the cicadas, but they have this sort of a wedge shape to them. So this sort of helps protect them, for this particular one, from the sun and from predators. They don't all form spittle type stuff like that. So that'll be your leaf hoppers, tree hoppers, and cicadas. They actually kind of look alike. And your aphids and your scales. And remember, this is all in that same Hemiptera order, even though they don't look much alike. You're probably familiar with what aphids look like. The scale insects, how many people have not seen the scale insects on the prickly pears? Okay, so you're gonna get to see a little up close of what that looks like. So if we were to take some of the fluff off and peel it away from the insect, this is what the insect looks like. There's little bitty legs in there, and it's piercing the mouth part there. It's sucking the juices out of the prickly pear. This stuff used to be more valuable than silver. Because red is a royal color, right? You have to be a royal to have red, because red was not a very stable dye. You couldn't get things to stay red. Then the explorers come to South America and they're like, everybody's wearing red. What the heck is up? And we want some of that. And they discovered it was the dye from these insects that made a very good, steadfast red dye. So they would ship it to Europe. And then this is where the prickly pear in the Mediterranean came from. They're like, well, let's just try to grow it over there. We've got, the right climate for it. So we grow it in the Mediterranean. And typically the ones that they harvest from don't have as much in the glochids and spines. This red dye isn't just used for dyeing clothes, though. Do I have it in there? Yes. Carmine, E120, cochineal or cochineal extract, carminic acid is used to color makeup and food. So if you're vegan, you want to pay attention to that. And some people are allergic to it. So again, something to be aware of. I know that back in the past, docents used to squish it and, mark kids' foreheads or something like that. Because you don't ever want to put something on somebody because you never know what kind of reaction it would be. So what I recommend doing is having like a little index card that you've already prepared with some of the dye on it, and keep that as a sample, because then you're not... It's really hard to find this at Eaton Canyon, because all the docents are, let me show you. So, and if it's in your garden, you can just hose them off if they are becoming a problem for the cactus. But yes, once upon a time, very, very expensive. So if you time travel, good stuff to have.
I remember a while back at Starbucks, they used to use that in some of their drinks, and
Yeah.
they freaked out when they realized what it was, and it was a big scandal. And
Yes, because I would much rather have a carcinogenic red dye. Because they pretty much have decided red dyes and blue dyes to be carcinogenic. So, avoid your red and blue food if you can, kind of thing. As far as the man-made chemicals, which just brings up the aside. When it says natural flavoring, what do you think that means?
It's not.
Advertising.
But what do you think technically what they mean by natural flavoring? So if it's lemonade with natural flavoring, what do you think?
kind of going backwards.
Oh, kind of going backwards.
The color, is that the bud, or is it?
It's the bodily juices of the bud, yeah.
Oh, because you mentioned, vegan.
Yeah. You have to avoid these if you don't want to eat those. Kind of thing. The natural flavoring.
It's not the actual lemon juice, it's a flavor they manufacture. That's my understanding.
Yes, yeah. So natural flavoring just means that flavor exists in nature. Not that they got it from nature. Real fruit juice would be they got it from nature. Natural flavoring means it's a flavor found in nature.
That's why I
That's
think
it.
it's just advertising.
Yes, that's all it means, is that flavor exists in nature. Because artificially flavored are those flavors that, like, you really like that flavor, you don't know why, you kind of get that flavor, but it doesn't really exist out there in nature. Oh, I love these guys. How many Star Trek fans? Rapid on. I'm talking that's the little thing that went in this ear, but these guys are little. So nerve wings. So the wings of these, you can see lots of the venation. So that's where they came up with Neuroptera, and that's things like your lace wings and your antlions. I don't have owl flies or mancipits here, but Again, we have an egg, a larva, and an adult that looks nothing like the kid. So what kind of metamorphosis? Completely different, so complete metamorphosis. So if you've ever seen those little funnel-shaped things in the sand, this is the little guys at the bottom of it. Sometimes they call them doodle bugs, but an antlion. So if you have kind of like a screen colander or something, you can scoop under and sift out the sand and find this little guy at the bottom, and then you put him back.
And I always like to tell this, that's one of the most common insects we have here that you don't see. And it's a fun thing to remember because in the summer, they get their little doodle trails around
Yes,
here.
yeah.
And this year, I don't know what, it was a great year for them. They were all over the place, so something to remember.
Yeah, and they're kind of cute, and they just kind of like back up into things. And they're just waiting for some little insect like an ant to fall in their little pit. And then they get to eat it. Now, after you've been hiking a long time and you start looking for these things, you will start having pattern recognition where you'll be walking by a plant and you will stop and you will be like, that was not a plant. And you will be able to astound the people on the hike because you will see lacewing eggs, which will be like the tip of a pin, because you'll see that white glint out of the corner of your eye, and they'll be like, oh, it's one of those really good ones where they're just like, will be amazed, but it does. The sun just glints right off it. And they're predatory, so oftentimes predatory insects will lay single eggs, and so that kind of gives the other little kids a chance.
Pond turtles trying to escape.
Lacewing larva, again, really good for going after your aphids and other things, so another one of the good ones to have. Carnivore, going after other insects. So, fun ones to look at. But yeah, if you've never looked and investigated what's at the bottom of those little sand pits, give it a try. And then put the little guy back where you found him. You wouldn't want somebody picking you up out of your house and moving you to, you know, like the middle of Siberia or something. Okay, going into the beetles. Coleoptera, sheath wing. So beetles, their first wing has a special name, elytra, and it's like a sheath. Sometimes it's glossy. And so that's one of the easy ways to look at an insect and say, well, that looks like a beetle, because it's complete down to the very end. Unlike the hemiptera, which halfway down the wing, well, more than halfway, it became membranous again, this is solid. They tend to be herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores, so a little bit of everything for the different beetles. Complete life cycle. So as a juvenile, they look nothing like the adult parent. So complete metamorphosis. The larvae are often, not always, but often called grubs. And you'll see scarab beetles there, like your fruit beetles, fig beetles, June beetles, have a particular shape. Are these lady bugs? No. No. They are lady, if you want to use ladybug, it's a ladybug beetle. Ladybug, one word. Because you're not saying a ladybug like you would some other bug. So all together one word. Ladybug beetle. Weevils, I think they have cute noses. Adorable. There's that darkling beetle that we had at the very beginning. Real common one that you'll see hiking, so you can say it's a darkling beetle. It's Coleoptera, it sounds a little scientific there. Cucumber beetle you find in eating some of the garden plants. So those are beetles, and there was what, 300, 400,000 of these guys? Hymenoptera, that's going to be your bees, wasps, ants. FYI, the velvet ant is really a wasp, and she delivers a wicked, wicked sting. So it's not like a cute little fuzzy ant.
And we do have them here.
Yes.
Yes, I've seen them up at the water tower.
Yeah, they can be orange or red,
White.
other colors, but yeah, so they're really, really pretty. Herbivores or carnivores, if you've ever been barbecuing and you've had like a yellow jacket kind of trying to steal your hot dog. Really carnivore in that sense. Oak galls, and I think they were describing the oak galls out there. There will be like little, not all galls are caused by wasps, but in this case, a little teeny tiny gall wasp. And it injects the eggs into this formation of this gall. So the plant actually is responding to the chemicals that the female injects, and it kind of like, I say irritated, but that's, not really. The plant responds by forming a structure, and the structure is specific to what the plant is and what the insect is. So the galls will look different on different plants and in response to different insects. So here's an example of the gall wasp and the oak galls. Here is a wasp, the tarantula hawk, which actually will paralyze a tarantula, drag it into the burrow, lay its eggs on the living tarantula, and the young devour the tarantula. Nature is not kind. Yes.
If you want, there's this video online where it's a guy getting intentionally staining himself with one of these. Like, search Coyote Peterson tarantula wasp, and it'll come up. Like, you'll see the effects of it on humans.
Yeah. There's a scale for how bad a sting is, and it might be his name, somebody's name. And the tarantula was lie on the ground and cry. It was just like, don't even bother, because it is that painful.
We do have them here.
Yes, oh yes, we do. But only the females sting. And they have curly antennae most of the time. don't take any chances. Painful. Yeah, it's they often describe them like the bullet ant has a bite that apparently is like getting shot. Fire ants are bad enough, right? Bullet ants, I don't even want to go there. And then some tribes actually have a ceremony where the guys stick their hands in these mitts that they've made that are lined with these ants.
Oh, great.
Is there anything that you use pain?
I don't think, I'm not even sure, so like ants would be a formic acid, so hypothetically you could try some baking soda, but as far as a tarantula hawk or something like that, they do make a kit, and I actually worked for the research lab that did the studies on it. It's called the extractor. It's like a little suction cup. And all my stuff is in Tucson because I've moved half my stuff there. And they use it to extract venom out of different bites or stings. And so we were able to scientifically provide enough evidence that it did remove some of the venom. And gone are the days, where you use a razor blade and cut it and suck it open. But let's talk about this being only the females that sting. So the stinger is actually a modified ovipositor. So the ovipositor is for laying the egg. So here's a praying mantis laying an egg sac on a piece of fabric. That's pretty easy, right? Lay it on a piece of fabric. On things is one thing. If you are going to put it in something, you need to have something to deliver it in. So if you're going to put it in the ground, your ovipositor just needs to be able to penetrate the dirt or whatever material that you're putting it into. If you're going to put it into a tougher plant material or into another insect or animal or whatever you're going to put it in, you're going to need a little bit more of a jabby type ovipositor. So they started, developing these pretty wicked looking ovipositors, and then, sometimes in some insects there was a change that like the queen, I'll lay the eggs. You lay the eggs. Well, what are we going to do with these things now? Let's make them into wicked defense mechanisms. So the only bees that are going to sting you are going to be female. They're the only ones with the equipment. And they're not gonna be laying eggs. So some have actually said, hey, I'd rather have this bee just for stinging only. Others are like, ooh, I like the stinging idea, but I still need to lay eggs, so now I'm gonna come up with a different way to get the eggs out, kind of thing. But only the females. There are ways for the native bees to be able to tell whether it's a male or a female. The males, they're kind of lazy, so they're just like hanging out on plants, and they don't have the big scoops for collecting the pollen and stuff. So but I wouldn't suggest you give that a try. Yes?
Oh, no, I was gonna try to catch this insect.
Oh.
That keeps bothering me, and I'm thinking, what is it, my scent, or why?
They wasn't bothering me, I saw them going. Yeah, I keep doing this.
Just pheromones. Finds you attractive. So, bee, wasp. So bees tend to be one and done. I've got a barb stinger. I'm going to make sure that sucker stays in you. The little venom in you. I'm going to sacrifice my life. So it's usually a one and done. So bees are like, no, just leave me alone. I don't want to die. Just leave me. No, I'm not going to come after you unless they tend to be a more aggressive species of bee, in which case they're like, we will die to save the family, and then they're coming after you. Whereas, some of the wasps and hornets and things like that, they're multiple stabs, because they're all into reuse and recycle. So a good place to find out about native bees is pollinator.org. So here's a whole bunch of different types of native bees. Here's some longhorn bees just chilling on my flaxseed in the front yard. All boys, just chillaxing. And then I took a little bee seminar by Hartwood at Eaton Canyon, and he talked about how bees will curl up inside the penstemon when it's cloudy and rainy. It happened to be a cloudy, rainy day, so I went out around the grounds of Eaton Canyon, and sure enough, I got quite a few pictures, some different flowers, but they were just all like on the side, kicking back from the weather, so that was kind of cool. All right, the Lepidoptera. So that's our butterflies and moths, and lepo, the lepido part of it, is scaly wings. So leprosy was kind of a scaly disease. That's why I came with that name. So it's an easy way to remember, because especially if you were to touch the wing of a butterfly or moth, a lot of those little scales would come off. And if I had my dissecting scope, I could pass around, you could see the little scales under the dissecting scope. Herbivorous, omnivorous, some do drink blood. Hey, they adapt. They have different larval food sources. So that's how you can identify a lot of butterflies and moths, is where the larvae is. So like the caterpillars for monarchs, like the milkweed, because of the noxious substances in the milkweed, it leaves them with a bad taste. So once a bird has tried a monarch, the bird pretty much is like, I'm never going to eat one of those again. So the monarchs are just happy and doing well. Now, there is typically a way to distinguish butterflies and moths from each other by the antenna, but there are so many exceptions to that rule. About all you can say is if it's got this really bristly antenna, it's a moth. But it doesn't have to have that kind of antenna to be a moth. For instance, it doesn't have its little... So here's a hawk moth, and the antenna is clubbed and it's not all bristly. And how it holds its wing is also not really a perfect indicator either. So there's a really pretty moth. They kind of hover like hummingbirds. So you'll get to know some of the moths by the shape of their body, and the butterflies by the shape of their bodies or the shape of their wings, even if you can't identify them any further. Like, oh, that's a skipper because it's got these funky little wings. Or, oh, that's a swallowtail because of the wings. Monarchs because of the pattern. The hair streaks, there's little appendages off the back there. The hawk moths, you just kind of get to know their shape. So don't worry about like not being able to identify a specific moth or butterfly. You can get cheat sheets, but you might also be wrong because some of them look pretty close when they're flying around. The yucca moth, I think they covered during the botany that the two meet each other for reproductive purposes. Are there much of the yucca at this elevation?
We have, yeah, a lot of yucca.
Yeah. So the moths will lay their eggs inside the seed pods, and the larvae will eat a certain amount of the seeds, but not all of them. And so they're responsible for the pollination of the plant, and then the plant is responsible for the life cycle of the moth as well. So they do well together. Mimicry, where one insect will look like another insect or spider or something like that. Now that whole viceroy experiment, not getting eaten because they look like monarchs and everything, they no longer say that's so true because insects look at things in ultraviolet. These do not look alike from an ultraviolet perspective. The insects look completely different. So there have been other studies about whether this whole viceroy thing was a good experiment or not. Here is a fly mimicking a spider though, and they'll even like move their wings, and it does. If you ever see a video of this, it really does look like a spider. Diptera. I think we're on our last one here. Diptera, guy is two wings. Unlike the four wings of all the other insects, the flies only have, and mosquitoes only have the two wings, and then they'll have these other structures called halteres, which are very small, which enable them to do the aerobatics that they can do, that sort of gyrating and just being able to tumble through space and still fly around.
Can you repeat the name of that structure?
Yeah, I can do you one better. I'll give you an image of it here in a second. So the flies, they can be aquatic and terrestrial, herbivores, omnivores, carnivores, bloodsuckers, you name it, the flies cover it. Complete life cycle, larvae are often called megas. And this is important to know because some flies really like the pollen of certain plants, and it's not a good idea to plant those just outside the drive-thru window of McDonald's, which they did for a while. But finally somebody explained to them, no, that's not a good one to them. Robber fly, this guy is very predatory. He's got quite the little beak there and grasping front legs. So here are the two little structures, the halteres where I have them. There we go. And so, even though some flies look like bees, they're really not. And the biggest way to tell real easy is how many wings they have. And sometimes with the shape of the head and the eyes as well. There's a real close-up of it. Just a little nubbin of the wing there. Do you feel like you were drinking out of a fire hose? Lots of stuff. So hopefully the insect order sheet will help you to be able to know where to go to look up the insect that you found, take a picture of it. If you're still having trouble, take a picture of it and email me and I will help you get there. So the insect order one should help. I've got some insects up here if you wanted to take a peek at a few of them. I'll hang out for a little bit and answer questions. If you would do me a favor and pull off the legs and wings of your critters, put them into the cleaner of the two baggies and squish up your plate and put it back into the other baggie and squeeze up your little plastic critters, and I'll come grab those. But thank you guys so much.